Starfield's Shattered Space expansion is reportedly ready to be revealed soon. Since Starfield was released in September of 2023, its player count has been steadily winding down. On platforms like Steam, Starfield is now on par or has fallen below with the likes of Fallout 4 and Skyrim. For the most part, fans of BGS's spacefaring RPG are waiting patiently for the news of the game's first major expansion, Shattered Space. It's likely to drop even beyond those games because, of course, they have established modding communities, and Starfield's modding community has actually been pretty anemic recently. There were all of those stories that a lot of major modding groups and teams were choosing to just skip Starfield because they just didn't think it was worth the trouble and the game wasn't fun enough to fix up. Maybe that changes with these expansions, but it does seem like of all of BGS's games, Starfield's going to be the one that they have to do a lot more work on. Games like Skyrim and Fallout 4 even, a lot of people do a lot of the heavy lifting with patches and mods and stuff, and so it seems like BGS is going to have to focus a lot on Starfield to pick up the slack that they left. So that's going to be interesting. Those who purchased the higher editions of Starfield already have access to Shattered Space, which was named before Starfield was even released. However, we're now almost 7 months after the launch of Starfield, and nobody is any the wiser about Shattered Space. This might be about to change. I've always expected that they were going to announce it this coming summer at like the Xbox showcase. That's going to happen in probably June. It just seems to line up. BGS doesn't tend to like announcing stuff way in advance. It just hasn't really been their MO, but they also released a lot of stuff for like Fallout 4 much faster. Look at this. Fallout 4 released in November of 2015, right? I think it was November of 20, because it was like 11, I don't know. If somebody in chat knows the exact launch date, or can Google it real quick. But within just a few months, within like less than 6 months at the most, they came in and had a DLC in March. Granted, it's the Automatron, so it's not like a full narrative expansion or anything. It was November 10th. Okay. So it's like a smaller DLC of like improving settlements and stuff, but still it's something. The Wasteland Workshop was April. They had another DLC, a big narrative one, in May. So 6 months after the game, they had Far Harbor. 6 months. And Far Harbor, I'll back them up on this. I think this is the best DLC they have for Fallout 4. It actually made me question whether the writing staff at Bethesda was just crappy. Because after Fallout 4, I was like, the writing staff, I don't know what they're doing. Like, they need to rework that. The writing is just terrible on these games. It's predictable. There's plot holes galore. Everything is so contrived. It's just a mess. And then Far Harbor was really, really good. And then Starfield kind of imploded. And then Nuka World came out later and was also not very good. But Far Harbor was pretty good. Only 6 months after the game. Then Contraption, smaller update. Vault-Tec, smaller DLC as well. And then Nuka World launched in August, which is what, like 9 months after? 9-10 months after the release of the game. So we're approaching, let's see, it's been September, October, November, December, January, February. We're going into March. I guess technically September was a full month because it launched like early access in late August, right? I think that's technically, so I guess September, October, November, December, January, February. Going into March, we're at 7. So already, according to Fallout 4's release schedule, we would be here. Really, we would be more like here, which is crazy. Like, the production on the DLC has been far, far less with Starfield. Now, it could be because they're trying to do something way bigger than even Far Harbor, which I don't expect this next like Shattered Space expansion to be bigger than Far Harbor, but maybe that's why it's taking longer, is because they're going to come out swinging with something huge. Maybe that's what it is. I hope. If it's smaller than Far Harbor, it's going to be kind of a weird look after all this time. What he says in the rest of the article, it's a small suggestion, but it's a suggestion nonetheless. Recently, it was discovered through SteamDB that Starfield's listing on the platform had been updated to show an unknown app in the game's DLC section. This is a new addition to the game's metadata, but it's not known what that change indicates. To put that into perspective, accessing the same section in SteamDB for Fallout 4 reveals a list of the game's downloadable content, including Nuka World and the Vault-Tec Workshop. It could suggest something is coming soon that Bethesda Game Studios is preparing for, but wants to keep quiet for now. SteamDB is a treasure trove for tidbits like this, as the inherent transparency of the platform makes it impossible for anything to remain hidden. It's the first indicator that we have something extra coming to Starfield. We just can't tell yet if it's that if that's Shattered Space or a smaller, less significant piece of DLC. In the coming months, Bethesda is opening up the creation kit to modders and at some point bringing the first major expansion into the somewhat barren landscape of the biggest game it has ever created. Some are arguing that it's too little too late, but it's sure to bring vast swaths of players back to the game when something is released. I know there are some people that have been saying that Bethesda got a bad rap, and I think in general I would probably agree. I think Bethesda, I think Starfield got a bad rap because it failed to live up to a lot of expectations. I think that's the biggest problem it had. I think if they were able to manage those expectations a little bit better, and if Todd didn't say some sweet little lies, and specifically like with Todd, I don't think I ever caught him lying about anything with Starfield, but I sure as hell caught him not talking about things he definitely should have been talking about. Like specifically with traversal, specifically with how exploration actually worked. His lack of clarity, I think, led to a lot of people landing with false expectations of what the game was actually going to provide them. And that lands at his feet. And it's, once is an occurrence, twice is a pattern, or twice is a coincidence, three times is a pattern. And I think with Todd, he's done this so many times. With Fallout 3, he did it. Really with Oblivion and the like dynamic AI or whatever he called it. Radiant AI, that's what he called it. With the Radiant AI, that was heavily exaggerated. Fallout 3 had a bunch of heavily exaggerated things like 200 endings to the story. Skyrim had all sorts of exaggerations on what you could and couldn't do, where you could and couldn't go, endless side quests and things. Of course, Fallout 4 had a lot of problems itself. Fallout 76, I don't think I need to even describe. And so for Todd, there's this consistent pattern of over-promising and then not being clear enough to manage expectations properly. And then his fans get upset when the game comes out and doesn't live up to their expectations because he didn't do anything to manage them. And part of that you could say lands on the community, but part of it is also like, I don't know, there's one common thread here, and it's always Todd. It flows through all of the fabric of these games, So I don't think you can separate the two. And I think that that's the biggest problem that landed on Starfield's feet. I think if people went into that game with lower expectations, kind of like I did, I think you can have a good time with it. I'm not expecting to get hundreds and hundreds of hours out of it. I'm not expecting to get thousands of hours out of it. I'm not expecting to have my life changed by the narrative or anything. I'm just expecting kind of a lighthearted romp in the space hay with some interesting little mechanics and stuff, and maybe some fun side quests and quirky characters to encounter. And in that capacity, I think the game succeeds and is successful. That's oh, what a novel commentary, Luke. I think that it's successful in that regard, and it's a good time. If you were expecting more than that, though, you will be sorely disappointed. And that's the biggest problem for Starfield. Beyond that, I think the game just isn't very fun in large doses. The more of the game you play, the more you see how crazy repetitive the core activities are. And they're just not that interesting. And the biggest blunder of all that really harms the modding scene is that the adventuring and exploration is broken up so consistently by load screens, going in and out of your ship, flying to different planets, getting out of those planet or out of the ship on those planets and exploring. Every little bitty thing is broken up by load screens, and it really harms any sense of immersion or fun, unending exploration like you might have in a Fallout 4 or a Skyrim, certainly, or any of these others. And that's not something that can just be patched. Like, it really, really isn't. You can't just waltz in and do a quick patch to fix that. It's core to the game. And that lands on Bethesda's feet. I mean, that is just a design decision they made. That was a bad decision. And I don't honestly know how they thought that that was going to be received well. It's kind of baffling, honestly, but it just is what it is. But when the astronauts were on the moon, they weren't bored. Yeah, that AI response, that was so bad. The load screens completely ruins the appeal of space games. Well, that's why, like, most space games that are successful, all of them that I can think of, try very hard to avoid constant load screens and stuff. Whether you look at a game like Star Citizen or No Man's Sky or any of these others that are coming out like Star Wars Outlaws, they try very hard to avoid load screens. They'll mask them. They'll do cool things where it's like, oh, you're warping through the atmosphere and it's a load screen, but it's one that keeps you immersed and you don't really realize it's a load screen, right? It's not even a load screen because it's like a load action or a load activity or animation that plays out. It's better and bigger than a load screen, which is like a single thing, right? And I think that for BGS to think that that wasn't going to be a big deal is just nothing short of a massive blunder. Like, there really is not any other way to spin it than that was a calculation that you miscalculated. You know, it's a load BS. Yeah. Maybe modders will use mods to try and mask the loading screen somehow. I think the difficulty from what I've heard from modders, because I've done a handful of videos discussing it, and the modding scene and how all this works. And the thing that I heard from them was that it's just not that easy, because Starfield has a lot of things in it deep down in the code, such as where it like anchors everything in the instance when it loads. It loads everything based off of a single spawn point. And the further you get from that spawn point, the less accurate simulations become, the more erratic certain like AI placements and behaviors can become. Everything starts to kind of break down when you move far away from that spawn point. And apparently it's not that easy either to do something while the game is loading and dumping a previous spawn point and going back in, because the creation engine is built entirely around having that anchor point basically omnipresent. And if you ever unload that, you can't do anything until the engine has loaded in the next one. And I think that's probably pretty standard for games that are built around having load screens. You know, that's normal. But that's why to get a game that can basically not have load screens or bypass it in creative ways, like Star Citizen, it takes major coding overhauls, which is what we've seen with Star Citizen, and where Star Citizen has taken years and hundreds of millions of dollars to rework in significant ways. But you can definitely tell the difference in the benefit. Same thing with Team Ninja. Their engine limits their ability. Yeah, and I mean, every engine has limitations, even From Software and their engine. Apparently, really, at least all the way through Elden Ring, was not capable of going above 60. I believe Armored Core 6 was the first time they allowed you to go over 60. So it's a big struggle to get over that hump for some of these studios. The loads in games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth are cool enough with how you crouch walk under things, squeeze through tight spaces. Yeah, and like with the spaceship, of course, it's not that easy to do because it's not like, it's a much more visual thing. But how Star Wars Outlaws does it, I think, is a great example. So like, you just hopped in your ship, you hop on here, and this is technically like, I think you technically have control of the ship. You can move it like left to right here, but this is a load screen. You can like kind of see it doing its thing. This is the wanted level though. But like you can see it's taking its time. It's loading. You're flying through clouds and stuff, but this is a load screen. But they managed to cover it up in this really cool way. And then you fade into orbit and you're like, ooh, didn't even really notice. But you never had to sit and watch a load screen. Technically, it took a handful of seconds to get there. But this feels way better to play in a video game than what Starfield does, which is like, you know, you get up, you sit down, load screen. You're in the atmosphere. You want to travel somewhere else, load screen. You know, feels way better. People have done all of these games where like, or all of these videos where it's like, if Bethesda made Pal World, you know, like this. And like, when put into any other game, you start to realize how bad it feels. And it's really clear how outdated it is. You know, like all of a sudden, super easy to tell. Like, oh yeah, no, this This doesn't feel good. And that's why, like, I think it does matter that Bethesda fixes this. I know some people have said, well, I don't really mind. I'm able to tune it out really easily. I don't care about load screens. Good for you. I mean, props. But I think stuff like this does matter. I think studios should be able to put together solid games that perform well. You want to ride it? Hold on, load screen. And then you just see it there. You want to fast travel over here? You know, and I think just for I like the cinematic like aspect ratio too. That's a good touch. Technically, you would have needed a load screen to get off of your mount. That would have been the most accurate. But again, like just the constant load screens interrupting adventuring and exploration. That's the problem, and that's the issue. Like, the load screens were always there in Fallout 4 and Skyrim and all these games, but they weren't as noticeable because once you went out in the open world, you could just run around exploring and doing stuff. And so when you had been running around for 15 minutes and then you come across a cave and you load into the cave, it wasn't that disruptive. But with Starfield, what makes it feel bad is that you go to your, you want to fast travel over to where your ship is. That's a load screen. Then you want to get into your ship. Just getting inside of it is a load screen. And then you want to sit down and take off. Okay, now you take off, that's a load screen. Now you're in the atmosphere of the planet, or you're out of the atmosphere. You're in the orbit of the planet. Okay, well now you select where you want to fly to. That's another loading screen. And then you get there, and now you have to select okay, I want to land on that planet surface at this location. That's a load screen. Now you want to get out of your ship. That's another load screen. So just traveling from point A to point B is like 6 or 7 load screens, and it's insane. And you're like, what is happening right now? Whereas before, if you were playing in a game like Fallout 4, you just kind of walk out the door and you just start exploring. And it's wide open to you. It works way better. Yeah, I think pacing of the screens is crucial. As for, I see like Hogwarts Legacy is another example. So like Hogwarts Legacy also has had difficulty with like pacing. You can go straight from the castle outside the castle and start exploring around. Like, you don't need to actually load into anything. There are some areas where you'll have to load in if you want to go somewhere, but in general, it's a very fluid thing. They might have the little like white loading circle that pops up for a second that kind of covers it up. But here, like, you want to walk in, you just walk right in. In a Bethesda game, that would be a load screen. And then you want to go back out, another load screen. But you can see just the flow of gameplay works way better when you're able to just kind of run around, do whatever you want, and it's not interrupting. Like, it's like Steve Jobs used to say, technology is at its best when it's invisible. And with games, it's magical. Games run it all. But part of the magic of games is that you're able to become immersed in a world. And ideally, when the games are working properly, you should never have to think about it being a video game. Like, it should just be a fluid thing. Maybe some games you could say, well, there's mechanics you have to be aware of and you have to know to min-max and collect loot and that stuff. And sure, in that case, yeah, you're aware of it being a video game. But you shouldn't have to stress as the player about the physics system working properly, or about the loading working properly, or about frame rates or things like that. You just shouldn't have to worry about that. He took my thing.